When you're just starting to explore jazz and jazz chords, it's easy to get lost in complicated chords that are difficult to play and even more difficult to use in a song. And that's not where you want to start. Instead, I'm going to show you some very easy chords and 5 ways that you can use them to play music. And it's also sort of a walk through jazz and jazz guitar history. The chords I'm talking about are, of course, Shell-Voicings, which are so practical on guitar that it's almost hard to believe. Let me explain how they're constructed before we get to the famous jazz guitarists and the different styles. Now, this is very simple. There are 2 versions of every chord. For a C major 7 chord, you have one with the root on the 5th string, and then the 3rd and the 7th on the middle strings. The other version has the root on the 6th string, but then the 3rd and the 7th are still on the middle string set. Now, having the chord on the middle string set is important because it makes a lot of chord progressions easier to play. Here's one version of a 2-5-1. But you can also play that starting with the root on the 6th string. That sounds like this. For Shell-Voicings, you just leave out the 5th, and as you will hear in the songs, that's perfectly fine. In a song, you won't really miss it. Towards the end, I'm gonna show you how you might add in the 5th again, or maybe some more interesting notes like extensions and alterations. It's almost not jazz yet. When you start with a song, you just want to play the chords to hear how the harmony sounds. Check out how this works on the song Autumn Leaves, and there are 2 things you want to notice. The chords move very smoothly through the progression, and a little into the song, I start adding a bit of rhythm just to give you an idea of how you can use them when you go beyond just hearing the harmony. I'm sure you can hear how easy it is to use these, and also how much a little rhythm adds to your comping. The next example is often connected to the swing era of jazz. Shell-Voicings are very often used in big bands where the guitar is as much a percussion instrument as it is a harmony instrument. And here you play the chords in quarter notes with a slight accent on 2 and 4. The most famous guitarist to play this style was probably Freddie, who was the guitarist with the Count Basie big band and had the nickname Father Time. Here I'm playing that type of comping on the song Satin Doll, which is from another famous big band, Duke Ellington. This way of playing is sometimes looked down on a bit because it's old-fashioned and doesn't work with more modern-sounding playing. But if you're playing in a big band that plays this style of music, then it is a lot of fun to do. And it actually works in more places than you might think. Let's open up the rhythm a bit and go from swing to hard bop. I'm also adding a bonus variation, which isn't really jazz, but you will need it. And trust me, you definitely want to learn it. If you're interested in jazz guitar and jazz chords, then one guitarist that you have to check out is, of course, Joe Pass. One of his opinions on chords always resonated with me and also immediately fits with the Shell-Voicings that we're talking about in this video.
Dominant. You must look at chord changes really in the simplest way you can look at them. Don't complicate them.
And that is exactly what you're doing going through this material. Simple chords, just using them differently on songs. And Joe Pass was, of course, famous for playing solo guitar and also being an amazing bebop guitarist. But he was also incredible at accompanying vocalists. His playing on the duo albums with Ella Fitzgerald is simply mind-blowing, and those albums are a must if you're interested in jazz. I don't think I've ever heard Joe Pass only play Shell-Voicings. He always does a lot of other brilliant stuff as well, but it's still a great foundation and really connected to how he approaches comping. Now, what I'm using here is that we have a natural split in the Shell-Voicings between the root note and the chord. So you can play all the notes together, but you can also split them up. And that gives you a lot more variation, and you can play stuff like this. Check out the C6 chord that I'm using in this next example and the anticipated chords. So anticipated chords are playing the chord a bit early on the 4 and, which really adds to the energy of the music. I do that on the E7 and on the G7. Of course, Joe Pass would add a lot more to the chords and not only play 3-note voicings all the time, but even when he does that, you can still see the Shell-Voicings in there. Check this out. This is one of the things that I will help you get started with in my online course, Jazz Chord Craftsmanship, which is a step-by-step way to build jazz chord and comping skills. I link to it in the video description. Check it out and join me and the other students in the community where we have a lot of fun with jazz harmony. But there is another thing that is often associated with Joe Pass that Shell-Voicings also do very well. This way of playing is kind of stealing from another instrument, but it is a great way to keep the groove going, especially if you're playing in a duo with a vocalist or a horn player. It was mostly associated with Joe Pass, but he actually only uses it a bit here and there and doesn't play entire songs like this. I'm of course talking about chords and walking bass. One of the main reasons this works with Shell-Voicings is that the harmony is already split in sets of strings on the guitar. So lower strings do bass notes and the middle two are the chord, and that makes it possible to play chords and walking bass together without breaking your fingers. You play quarter note bass lines that move from one root note to the next and then add chords over it when possible. The way the bass line is always moving towards the next root note really drives the whole thing forward. Here's an example on the song All the Things You Are. Now that you heard one extreme where the bass is getting all the attention, then it makes sense to also do the opposite of that. And afterwards, I also want to add a bonus variation, even if it isn't really jazz. A minimalist approach that is a great way to expand the chords is to play the Shell-Voicings without the root or bass note, so only 2 notes, which is of course perfect for us guitarists who don't like to think too much. You'll sometimes hear Jim Hall or John Scofield doing this, and once you leave out the root, you can also start to add other notes quite easily. And as you'll see, it opens up a world of interesting colors and melodic movement. The minimalist approach on a blues in C sounds like this. I'll show you how to add more color afterwards. And using that as a foundation, you have a few fingers free to add more color and melodies on top of the chord. And now this becomes fairly easy to play. But there is another thing where Shell-Voicings sound amazing, and even though it is associated with jazz, it really is another style. This groove also uses that natural split that I already talked about earlier. I'm of course talking about Bossanova and Samba, something that jazz has almost claimed ownership of, even though it is of course also its own style. Now the beautiful thing about this style of music is that it was invented on guitar, so it's really made for the instrument, and it also uses the rich harmony of jazz. Bossanova grooves have 2 layers, a bass part that's on beat 1 and 3 with an alternating bass if that's possible, so moving down to the 5th. But if the root is on the 6th string, you can't really do that, and then you just repeat that note. The interesting part is of course the pattern that's played with the chord, so the high part of this. And just playing that pattern together with the bass is already a complete groove and sounds great. And if you put this to use on a song like So Danzo Samba, then you get this. But you also want to explore how to add more melody and color to the Shell-Voicings, which is the one thing that you're now missing to really make your comping sound great. Check out this video that covers that. It also has some clips from Joe Pass talking about how he thinks about chords and how that makes the process a lot easier for him. And I think it makes a lot of sense. Check it out, learn jazz, make music.